have kind of a New Testament house fellowship, it's really hard, almost virtually impossible to have the family the way it should be, or the state the way it should be, really, because the church is that nucleus to affect the families and to affect the state. And so a lot of times I like to share on family first, but really if ones are not a part of a New Testament group like we've been discussing, if they're not a part of that, all the problems they may have with a husband, with a wife, with children or parents or whatever problems, I guess I'd say first get a part of a spiritual family, because from that spiritual family you can help the physical families. And then when the physical families are strong and moving to the glory of God, then they can affect neighbors and cities and the state. Is that...
I can connect with how house church is critical for the family.
Connect how the house church is critical for the family, yes.
Yes, but it's not so easy with the state. So can you flesh that out?
Okay, so Bob said he can connect with how the house church is critical for the family. And let me just say, Bob, to add a little bit to that, it is extremely critical for the family. And I don't know, not saying there aren't, but where there is the opportunity to be a part of a house church fellowship and a family is not, I don't know of a successful family that models what Christ wants.
It's pretty tough.
It's pretty tough, yeah.
Because you can literally read by yourself even in most of the churches.
Yeah.
Across the
traditional church. Well, the traditional church really unwittingly gravitates against the family. You walk in, you're really the bus driver for your family. You bus the kids to the church, they take the kids, they even separate the kids from the parents, they even separate the brothers from the sisters, different ages. And sometimes they separate the husbands from the wives. And, it just, and you say, oh, my kids love that Sunday school so much, it's so much fun. And they don't realize how maybe dad is using it as a crutch not to really be building into their lives, having them have a lot of fun with them. And it begins to supplant so that they end up following more their Sunday school teacher or their youth group teacher and look to them more than their father and their mother. And so sometimes what is good can be the enemy of what is best. And a lot of it is good, but without realizing it, it's perverting and undermining oftentimes, not often, invariably. Look, you have to make a decision in life. Is God infinite, and does he know more than all of us put together? If he does, was he just dumb because he left stuff out and forgot? Or because he didn't put other stuff in that he should have? Or did he give the right model? And so, as it says in the law, as it says in Proverbs, as it says in the New Testament, not to add or not to take away. It even says, so it doesn't mean we can't have all sorts of miscellaneous stuff, but as a church, we shouldn't be adding to that model. Somebody says, well, we're not to follow everything, or we couldn't have cars today, or telephones. Well, if God addressed communication or transportation, and he says, look, I want you to always ride on a camel, then I'd be on a camel. But God doesn't address how you get from one city to the other, whether you walk, whether you fly, or whether you're on a camel. But he does address how we should meet together. So that is why we have to follow that and not add to it and not take away from it. Our churches are like octopuses. They've got all these hundreds of ministries, some of them, literally dozens of, quote, ministries. But that undermines, not often, invariably, unquestionably, it undermines what he has. In other words, as a physical body, is it benefit if you say, boy, it's sure good to have this arm. Hey, it's great to have this arm. I want to add an arm. I want to have 3 arms or 4 arms. In my mind, I think, yeah, sometimes I wish I had an extra hand, sticking out here when I was trying to tie something or do something. And that may be good for that specific moment, for that specific thing. But then when I go to bed at night, I'm laying on an arm that's sticking out my chest or out my back. You see, we oftentimes go for what's expedient for the moment that seems better, but in the long run it undermines the whole function of the body. And so that's why God gave 4 things. The family were all together, intergenerational and young and old, and
And those are the four elements. But as far as the state, I think, Bob, to get off on the family and ones that have children, younger and older, and there's so much on that. If they don't, we could go on and on and on this. It's so strategic if you've got children, so strategic if you've got a wife in the context of the church, if it's following the New Testament model, even with wives covering their heads when they pray, and men not covering them when they pray to show that they're the head in the headship. It's a model that's there every week to remind the children, to remind the wife, but I guess I'd say for the state, as a church, as a church develops, it can have enormous effect on its city. It's maybe like a basketball team. If you bring 5 people together and they've never played much basketball, they may not be great at competing, but in time, those 5 men will be better in competing than if they're by themselves. And so nothing can be more effective than affecting the state than the church itself. But if a group is developing or has needs, the priority of a church would not be to affect the political leaders prior to or neglecting, because you could spend time campaigning, you could do a lot of things to affect the state, to promoting certain godly candidates, et cetera, et cetera. But with some in a fellowship, there may be needs with the father, the mother, the children, their family, and the family would have priority, number one. Number two, others in your congregation would have priority. The last, but not least, would be outside your state. But I would say the priority would be your physical family. Secondly would be your spiritual family. And then when the physical families have got things that God wants for them and maturity and together and needs being met, then the church as a whole can have an impact on having godly leaders ruling according to the law of God in their city and eventually their state or nation. That's my only thought. I don't know if you have a thought on it, Bob.
That's good.
Yeah. But that's the...
It's enough to say that it would be an outgrowth of the maturity of those
yeah.
churches individually combined, that they would have an effect on their neighborhoods.
I think so, yeah.
States, their nation.
Yeah. So if there's a young house church and it's growing and there may be just a lot of needs, the priority is not the state. Not that God considers it less important, but it's like with me. You guys are a priority to me, but you're not a priority above my wife. So we all have priorities. One is just our time alone with God. Number two, if you're married, it's your wife. And then number three, it's your children. Children have a priority in my life, but children do not have a priority above my wife. And so we have these priorities if there's needs. When things are great with my wife, I'm not needing more time for my children, then I can give time to the fellowship, the body. When things are adequate there, then we as a body can function more in helping reach the outside, even the lost, getting the gospel out. And affecting the political arena. I don't put evangelism above my wife or my family or above the believers. And in the long run, we'll reach more. I say, hey, but I could be out preaching the gospel and seeing lots of people saved. But, it's the same way with the baby. You can just go around and have babies. But in the long run, you'll populate the world, and you'll populate it better if you disciple the babies you have, if you build the children that God gives you. But physically, biologically, I could just, have all sorts of babies or go to other women. That's immoral. But so it's not just having children, it's following the design and the priority that God has. So in time, affecting our cities, in time, nothing can affect a city like God's people, and God's people cannot affect a city like a church that's united with leadership with the right vision. And in time, they'll turn that city upside down. It takes time, just like anything else. So we have to be patient. Any other thoughts?